Hello, this is Layla here from Silk&Wool, and we're making my Leafy Baby Blanket. Today I have completed the swatch and I will be casting on for the blanket itself, explaining a little bit on how I do my calculations, to know how many stitches to cast on, and we'll be making the border of the blanket. If you would like to know more about choosing the yarn and swatching, I will be leaving the links to the previous videos in the description. So I have made my swatch and established that one leaf is not one leaf, but one pattern repeat is approximately 8 centimeters wide, and I'm aiming for my blanket to be 80 centimeters, and this time I'd like to make my borders a bit larger and try and see how it looks. So I think I'm going to cast on for 9 pattern repeats. One pattern repeat is 15 stitches, so I'm going to cast on 15 times 9 for 9 pattern repeats, and then I need 2 more stitches for the pattern to be symmetrical, and this time I am going to do an 8 stitch border on each side, so this will be 16 stitches. So this is 135 stitches plus 18 equals 153 stitches to cast on. The math is very simple. Casting on 153 stitches is another story. So I've measured a very long end. I'm going to use a long tail cast on because it's the quickest for me, and I don't mind having a very long tail. I usually take about 3 times the intended length of the project. So I have about 3 meters of yarn here just to be safe. And I'm going to show you how I do a long tail cast on. This is not meant to be a full tutorial, but so I have the yarn that goes to my skins here, right? And I hold my hand like this. I put the yarn over my palm, behind the index finger, and do a sort of an 8 around index finger and the thumb. And then I'm holding, so this is my long tail here in front, and this goes to the yarn skin. And I'm holding both by 3 fingers here, and then I use two needles held double. I know a lot of people do it with just 1 needle, but I usually do 2. Today, because when you do 2 needles and you need to pull one out, and I'm casting on a circular needle, I'm going to use a small trick to do that, because with the number of stitches I'm casting on, I'm not going to be able to pull that out easily. I'm just going to use an extra needle for the cast on, and then the stitches that will slide on the cable. I'm using a slightly smaller size, but it doesn't really matter. So for the first stitch, I put my needles from below into the loop, grab, so here the yarn is crossing, so I grab that strand that goes over the index finger and I pull it back through the loop over the thumb, take out thumb, and then sort of do this movement to tighten the stitch around the needles. And now if I take my needle, so it looks like this, and if I take my needles back to the palm, here we have this loop that's forming, and I grab the loop that goes to the index finger, pull it back, and I continue like this for 153 times. So let me do that and get back to you when I'm done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So when I need to cast on a large number of stitches, I do them in batches of 10 and keep a piece of paper next to me and put a bar every time I make 10 stitches. Because I'm using 2 needles, I am always casting on my stitches very tightly. This way, when I take out the needle, they're quite loose, but they're all the same size. So we'll continue, and let's see how quickly I can cast on 153 stitches. So now I have reached 50 stitches here, and so I have 4 bars here. I don't know if you know this way of counting, but so I have here 4 bars for 40 stitches, and now the 5th one I'm going to cross them over, and I can easily see that I have 50 stitches done without actually counting the bars for a very long time. Moving my stitches along and continuing casting on. 1, 2, 3. So I have my 153 stitches hopefully cast on, and I'm now going to pull out my extra needle and quickly recount the stitches that I have to make sure I have the exact number, and I'll be ready to start the first row of the blanket. So my habit of counting stitches is moving them with my nail in pairs, and I always count in tens as well. So it would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's a bit tricky to count stitches here because the yarn is held double, but we'll get there. We'll get there. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 20, and so on. So yes, I do have 153 stitches, and I am ready to start my seed stitch border because I am going to have more stitches on the side border. Is 8 stitches. I think I will do a 10 row border at the bottom. Let me unwind my ends. So a 6 stitch border which prevents the edges of blanket from rolling is a simple yet efficient border, and it is created by alternating knit and purl stitches. So for the first row you will start with a knit stitch and then do a purl stitch, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, and you can see they're alternating. So a knit and a purl. I'm a continental knitter, but that does not mean anything at all. So I'm alternating the stitches, and then it depends on whether you're casting an even or an odd number of stitches, because in the next row you'd want the stitches to alternate as well. So as you probably know, when you turn your work and you start working in the opposite direction, which is going to happen here because we're not working in the round, the stitch that was a knit stitch on the right side, it will appear as a purl stitch on the wrong side, and vice versa. So for example here we have a knit stitch and a purl stitch. If we turn our work, this first stitch is now a purl and the second one is a knit. And not do any mistakes in alternating the stitches, that would be unpleasant. So when you have an odd number of stitches for the 6th stitch, it means you're starting with a knit stitch and your last stitch of the work will also be a knit stitch, because you do knit purl in pairs, and then the last odd stitch will be knit 1, which means that when you turn your work, your last knit stitch will show as purl stitch now on the other side, and to be alternating you can now start again with a knit stitch, and so your rows will always be the same. You start with a knit stitch, you do knit purl, knit purl, knit purl, finish with a knit stitch, turn your work around and start with a knit stitch again. And for Leafy Baby Blanket, this works when you have an odd number of pattern repeats, because each pattern repeat is 15 stitches, and then to make things symmetrical you will always add 2 stitches for the last purl 2 column, and then you will always add an even number of stitches for your 2 borders. So regardless of how many stitches is your border, you will always have 2. So this will be an even number, plus 2, plus if you have an odd number of pattern repeats, it will be 15 times 3, 5, 7, 9. That would always be an odd number. So you will be always casting on an odd number of stitches. However, if to get to the size that you want, you need to cast on an even number of pattern repeats, you will always be casting on an even number of stitches to start with, because your main part will always be a multiple of 30 plus 2 plus an even number of stitches for 2 borders. And when you have an even number of stitches, you have to do your seed stitch slightly differently, because with even number of stitches, the first row you start with a knit stitch and you do knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and you will end up with purl as your last stitch. Therefore, when you will turn your work to do the wrong side row, the purl stitch will be a knit stitch on the other side. So to alternate on the wrong side rows, you have to start your seed stitch with a purl, and then you do purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. Knit stitch will be your last stitch of the wrong side row, and then when you turn back for your right side row, so row 3, 5, 7, you start with a knit stitch again. So when you have an even number of stitches for the seed stitch border, you alternate your rows and you start right side rows with a knit stitch and wrong side rows with a purl stitch. So while I've been chatting about all of this, I've almost finished my first row, and there we go. So the stitch before the last one is a purl, and the last stitch is a knit stitch. I hope you can see. And I'm turning my work to work on the wrong side row, and you can see the first stitch is a purl, and I am going to start with a knit stitch again, and I am alternating knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and you can already see the seed stitch pattern showing up. So I'm going to do 10 rows of that for my bottom border, and I will come back to you for actually starting the pattern. And hopefully explaining a few details on how to make it easier to remember and avoid mistakes in making the beautiful leaves. So I have completed my bottom border, and I am now ready to start with the main pattern. In the end, I have made 11 rows of seed stitch because this is the length of the border that gives me the same length as 8 stitches give me the width. So my corner of the blanket would be as square as possible. So meet me in the next video for setting up the stitches for the main pattern and starting to work on the lace.